Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature successful business leaders, top law firms, green energy companies, and more. Today, we are joined by the author of Begin With We, Kyle McDowell. Kyle, welcome to the show.
Hey, Matthew. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on. Before we get in too far, a quick word from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. Do you know if a hacker's in your system? Most people and most companies don't until a hacker has done whatever bad deed they came to do. With Cyberlink's intrusion detection, you'll know if a hacker finds its way into your systems, then bypasses your security before they can do harm. Find out more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyberlynx.com. And now back to our show. Kyle, thanks for coming on. It is such an honor to have you on. You have recently written the book, Begin With We, which I absolutely love. Can you give us a little introduction into why you wrote it? What was the inspiration there?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So actually, the book's been out about 14 months now. We just passed the 1-year anniversary, and man, does it feel surreal. So I started the book as a passion project, and I remember telling my wife, if this book sells 1,000 copies, I'll be ecstatic. And we have far eclipsed that throughout the last 14 months, and it's been a blessing. So the book came to me at an awkward time. So I had just finished about a 28-year run inside of corporate America, and I had two very unique experiences that could not have been further from one another. So back in 2017, for some context, I took over a role leading 14,000 people inside of the world's, at the time it may still be, the world's largest healthcare enrollment operation. So we ran the enrollment operations for the Affordable Care Act, as well as 1-800-Medicare. So I had 11 locations, 15,000 people. And when I took that role, I was informed pretty early on by the hiring manager, the fellow that hired me, that there was some toxic tendencies inside of the organization, and there was a bit of dysfunction that had to be addressed. And I told myself prior to that role, Matthew, I said, if I ever had a chance to lead in a way that I had never led before, like truly from the heart, and care less about metrics and more about people, because I had this theory that if I really connected with the team, the metrics would come. Well, be careful what you wish for, because in 2017, this role happened, and I had a chance to just really do it differently. The night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of my organization, about 80, 90 days in, I was in my hotel room in Lawrence, Kansas, and I really had no idea what I was going to say. I was terrified, but I knew it had to be something unique. It had to be almost a rallying cry, because the leadership that I was joining, they had a tenure of north of 10 years. They had a lot of time together, and they had seen guys like me come and go multiple times. So I knew I had to be a little bit different. So I just started typing, and about midnight that evening, almost 1 o'clock the next morning, I ended up with 10 sentences. It's all I could manufacture. They each begin, and still do, begin with the word we. I'm not incredibly creative, so I now have the 10 we's. And they started as principles, and I didn't have anything sexier to wrap them in or name them. There was no muse on my shoulder for any of this. But there were 10 principles, and the way I said it then is still the way I say it now, so many years later. These are the rules that govern how we treat one another first. Because I always felt like if we're high functioning behind the curtains, our team is so much better positioned for success externally. We got to take care of each other. And then secondly, they govern who we treat externally. And, fast forward, another several years, the 10 We's are still the cultural manifesto at that organization. Their annual reviews all revolve around those principles, and they have the 10 We awards. So it took on a life of its own, right? I left that organization to join a massive company where I led another 15,000 people. I ran the world's largest mail order pharmacy for a time, among other functions. And I got to tell you, Matthew, the experience was night and day versus what I had just left. And those 5 years, or 4 years rather, where those principles were developed, changed my life and changed the life of so many others. And I thought, let me take this show on the road. And that was a rude awakening for me. And I realized that there are organizations that the toxicity and the dysfunction just runs too deep. And it takes more than one or two people to make that change. But I was so overwhelmed with the success that the previous engagement continued to show. I stayed in touch with so many people from that team, and they were the ones that encouraged me to write the book. So, years later, I'm on the sideline. I'd stepped away from corporate America, a bit disenfranchised, and these guys are reaching out saying, dude, you got this book in you. You need to put it together. So I did. And I wrote the book in about 15 months, and it immediately became a USA Today and Wall Street Journal bestseller, which is still kind of mind-bending to me that I could be on those two lists. And so I spent the last 14 months since the book was released promoting it. I'm on stage 2-3 times a month all over the country giving talks about the book and the things that it has done for me and so many others. And I balance that with a little bit of executive coaching here from my office in Tampa.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think the thing that struck me when I first saw the 10 W's was, this is all of the principles that we had in the Army. So I spent about 10 years in the Army, in the military intelligence corps, and this encompassed all of it nicely, and it integrates into, in a way that works for military, corporate, you name it, any sort of organization. I was like, that's brilliant. It's just really well done. I was like,
thank you, man. And it's, I have to admit, that was an unintended but beautiful byproduct of this whole thing. Twofold. One is the transition that these principles made from my professional life to my personal life. So I wrote these with just that team in mind. I never thought of anything, any bigger or broader. And the principles are so applicable in any realm of our business. Matter of fact, I've had strangers reach out to me and say the principles have changed how they raise their children, which is it's so humbling. But so the byproduct was, okay, I'm behaving this way at work, and it seems to be effective. I've gotten great followership. We're delivering wonderful results. I have friends now inside of this organization that used to be colleagues, and it even felt like that some of those friends were becoming family. But then I'd go home and I wouldn't keep those principles in mind. And I found myself feeling like a hypocrite, because if you're going to be this guy that espouses and evangelizes these principles for 14 to 15,000 people to follow, and for example, the very first we do the right thing, always, right? I could not be the guy seen as not doing the right thing outside of work. And it's a very silly example that I share, and I hope it hits home, but it is a silly one, is, dude, before these principles became my real purpose and my mission, I would leave my grocery cart in the parking lot after I loaded my groceries, right? Not the end of the world, but it's not the right thing. So I found myself, it happened so clearly one day. I jumped in the truck, pulled away, and I could see the cart in my rearview mirror, and something snapped. I go, that's not the right thing, you hypocrite. That's not the right thing. So it's transitioned from my professional life to my personal life, how I treat my friends, how I interact in my relationship with my wife. And the second unintended byproduct is the impact that I'm seeing it have on sports. It's so applicable in the world of sports. And as a matter of fact, I just saw an interview with Jalen Hurts, who quite literally in the span of about 45 seconds mentioned about 6, maybe 7 of the we's in his post-game press conference, which was mind-bending to me. So it's kind of, it feels as if I'm onto something. So I just continue to hustle and evangelize the message.
I love it. No, I think you touched on something, I think, with that kind of the continuity. A lot of people like to kind of separate out their work and professional lives, and I think that by disjointing them and trying to compartmentalize, I think it creates all kinds of internal problems. And if you have to do that, I think it's a sign that you're doing something wrong, right? That you can't take yourself throughout your day and be you. There's no continuity of you in that, and you're having to change. I don't think that works real well. And by playing by or living by these principles, it bleeds over to it lets you do and be you in
Yeah.
any situation,
Right
right?
on. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know what's fascinating, man? It's wonderful that you picked up on that because and I think it's as deep as you mentioned, and maybe even deeper. So if we find ourselves in our professional lives behaving in a way, I mean, think about it this way, man. We have two different vocabularies. You know that, right? There's the work vocabulary, and then you use words inside the workplace that you like. When's the last time you came home and said to your significant other, "Hey, honey, did you manage to get to your deliverables today?" Right? Nobody talks like that. You don't talk.
Yeah.
You don't mention action items at home. You don't circle back. You don't schedule a postmortem or a pre-meeting for them. So I think your point is so valid. And I'll just to kind of put a finer point on it is when the organization or the company more broadly or our leader specifically expects us to behave in a way that is less than authentic to who we really are. By definition, you're not bringing your best self to the table. You're not. We get a sense of dilution. Our ideas are watered down. We're diluted. We're not the same person. Now, I'm not naive. For any of your listeners, I'm not naive, right? There has to be a separation. There are certain topics and approaches we can't. I get that, but I just think the more an organization or specifically a leader allows his or her team to be themselves, the better the results are. And that's what. And by the way, when the book came out, I didn't do a whole bunch of promotion. I didn't even tell a lot of my friends that I was writing when I was writing. They were completely surprised about the contents of the book, how seriously I take that side of my life. Why? Because I wasn't the same person they knew. Right. So the guy in the book is not the guy they knew because I never the tween shall meet. I never led that way. I never lived that way. And these principles were the reason I am the same now, work and professional life. And I would encourage everyone to really explore that because it is liberating. It really is.
Yeah, no, it was the same way. I mean, it was tough because I think, going back to that old military way, when you're doing intel work, you can't even discuss the topics of what you were doing because it's all top secret work during the day, and there's stress and long hours, and you come home and you can't even really talk about your day. And so there's a natural compartmentalization that I didn't really enjoy and wasn't really conducive. And I don't think I managed that well in my
Wow.
personal life back then. Especially considering, just all the stresses and everything. But I
Sure.
do think now in the business world, it is so easy and to be able to do that. I don't need to keep that compartmentalized. I don't need to keep it separate. And so being just, true all the way through and getting to be me everywhere has been, as you said, very liberating. So
Right. Yeah. Good for
totally
you,
agree.
man. I'm glad you found
Thanks.
that. Good for
Yeah.
you.
Well, let me ask you, which of the 10 we's would you say is your favorite we?
Oh, without questions, we number 8, and that is we challenge each other. And I get this question a lot, actually. And the reason it's my favorite, and I should also caveat, it is one of the more difficult of the we's for a team and a lot of leaders to grasp. So, and let me add one other disclaimer. So, if we're going to challenge each other, and it's part of our ethos and who we are, there needs to be a rule to this one. And challenges must be grounded in either data or experience, right? So if we're doing a product launch and someone on the team has launched a similar product or been engaged in something similar at a previous organization or somewhere in their past, or they have data that says the path down which we are heading is the wrong one, we should absolutely listen. Those are challenges we must take, right? If someone says, well, I don't agree with the strategy of this product launch because I think the timing is wrong. That's your opinion. That's different. But if they have data to support that opinion, I'm all ears. But the nature of we challenge each other is such that in a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders lead this way, where the only one allowed or enabled to offer challenges are those with the titles. They are the only ones that challenge down the org. And I think for a high functioning team or team to be high functioning and deliver great results, challenges, they must come from peer to peer. They must come from employee to team leader. They must come from leader down to the team. They must be in all directions. I mean, when we look at, say, an NFL team has a 53-man roster and one head coach. There's a reason why there's an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, a linebackers coach, an offensive line. There's a reason there are coaches for each of those positions, because one person cannot possibly lead and effectively challenge all 53 men. They can't do it, right? So when we have an environment where the team knows not that they're allowed to challenge one another, they are obligated to challenge one another diplomatically, in a very diplomatic way, then the best results, the best opinions, a meritocracy of sorts follows. And I'll never forget this, man. I knew this challenge I knew this was a big one when I started to see a big transition in my staff meetings. So, my staff meetings were like everybody else's. I sat at the end of the table. The team was around. This is back when we were all brick and mortar, no 100% virtual at the time. We'd meet and you would have, each person around the table would go through their updates. And I'm paying attention, asking questions, and we're going back and forth. And invariably, every other member of the team they were either down like this on their laptop or they were like this on their phone, but they weren't paying attention to anything else. They weren't paying attention to their teammate. So when you open the door for challenges, because there's almost always a nugget of information someone else on the team, even if they've heard it via the hallway or gossip, they know they can relate to the update that one of the team members is given. If they know they're obligated to challenge, they hear the update. It's not just the leader pushing back and trying to pull out the best. It's like, hang on a second, that didn't make sense to me. So Lori, can I challenge you for a second? And Lori would know that, since she has subscribed to these principles, that she's not being attacked. It's not personal. It's going to come with data or experience. You get a lot more interaction. You get involvement. You get participation. It becomes more of a conversation among team members instead of, a one-to-one conversation with everyone else watching. The reason I say it's one of the more difficult ones, if not the most difficult, is a lot of bosses, not to be confused with leaders, a lot of bosses are not comfortable receiving challenge. They think once you hit a certain title, a certain level, that they are the only ones to challenge one another. And they're certainly rarely welcome of challenge from their team members, maybe from peers, certainly from their own boss, but challenging from their team, like that's not normal. I'm not used to that. So we create this environment where everyone is obligated to challenge. That's my favorite. But I think there's also a poetic component to this as well. Everything in life is accomplished from accepting a challenge, right? And whether it's transforming a culture of an organization, whether it's you want to learn a second language, whether you want to lose some weight, whatever the scenario is, anything worth having in this life on this planet is the result of overcoming one or more challenges.
100%. Now, I gotta kind of agree with you. I think this is a really important we. And I kind of want to dive in here and get into the specifics, because I think for a lot of people, even when the challenge comes from a peer, let alone a subordinate or a superior, wherever it comes from, I think a lot of people take that as a threat.
Yeah.
And so this is going to make me look bad. So a lot of people, when they're struggling to, hey, look, I want to get a promotion, I want to look good. Everybody's trying to do their best, right?
Yeah.
Let's assume that everybody's trying to do their best. And everybody's got the best for the organization in mind, and they're all, rowing in the same direction. Let's assume that to be the case. And in those scenarios where everybody's doing their best, and then they bring up an idea, and then that gets challenged, I think that a lot of people will feel threatened. They might feel like, oh, I'm going to lose faith. So I think I know where you're going to go with the answer with this, but I think it's worth exploring. In your experience, is this something where the fact that this is a guiding principle helps it mitigate that? Or how does that actually play out when you've made this a principle in the organization?
My man, I remember vividly when I created this principle of all the 10, I do remember this one vividly. And I knew the very next principle had to be, we embrace challenge. So if the team is subscribed, you can't subscribe to 5 of the 10, 6 of the 10, 8 of the 10. For this to work, you must subscribe to all 10. So we 8 is we challenge each other. We 9 is we embrace challenge. Now, what's interesting is I wrote that the embrace one, we 9, with the thought almost exclusively of me. Here's why. If I'm going to be in an environment where I'm going to really encourage my team to challenge me, I have to hold myself accountable. And the best way to do that is to make another principle that speaks to it. So I'm not, again, the hypocrite that I was so trying to avoid being. But the beauty of these two together is really cool because you're right. Your premise is right. So many times people receive a challenge as an affront. They take it personal, and it's really hard to lose your objectivity when you're kind of on the defensive. But what I saw happen over and over and over again, which became the norm, was when I was if I had a challenge for you, Matthew, I wouldn't just walk up and say, "Hey, why were you Q4 numbers not where they needed to be?" The data, the reporting we have shows that you were on track and you fell short. Like, no, that's not how I would start the conversation. I would start the conversation like, "Hey, Matthew, we challenge each other, right, man?" Which is a beautiful thing to watch because it became part of the vernacular and kind of I heard it almost every day. But you would watch the person on the receiving end, you would watch their shoulders drop, and almost you could see them become more at ease because they knew, if I can't connect this challenge to data or experience, I'm not obligated to listen. But if there is data or experience coming with this challenge, I must, because I already said I'm part of this team and we number 9 requires me to embrace that challenge.
Right. I love that because I think by combining those 8 and 9 kind of challenge and accept, kind of embrace it.
Mhm.
What you're doing is you're taking the personal part out of it. And you're saying, look, we're focused on a mission. We're all going in this direction. This isn't a personal thing. It's a how do we as an organization move? And I think this really beautifully helps people do that because I think it's really challenging for a lot of people to get over that because personally they're working towards their promotion. They're working, they're trying to be the best them, and they want everybody to see them as as great and good.
Right.
And then when you get challenged, it's like, oh shit,
Yep.
it's like
Yep.
I'm going to look bad. But no,
Mhm.
that's not what the challenge is. So you've made it a
No.
cultural norm that the challenge isn't we're crapping all over Matt because he said something stupid. Instead, it's, hey, look, this is how we're challenging Matt to do better or to defend this. Maybe I'm wrong, right? And so it opens up that discussion to make something better. Which brings
Yeah.
me to another point.
Yeah.
Right. So in our culture today, where there is not the people tend not to embrace discourse, right? They
Mhm.
don't want to have a discussion about something. It seems to be very polarized in like this is the way, and if you disagree with me, you're the enemy.
Yeah.
And it's becoming kind of ubiquitous everywhere you go. People aren't open to discussion anymore. There's just a right and a wrong, and I think that's crazy talk. And is this something where you're seeing culturally that combats that? It gives them a place to have discussion.
Beautiful observation. And by the way, the premise of your question, I think, is the biggest challenge, no pun intended, for our entire country. The fact that we cannot agree to disagree, and I don't hate you because you have a different opinion, or I feel you're less of a person because we don't see eye to eye on any number of issues. I think that's garbage. Inside the workplace, it is essential. Disagreement, challenges, even arguments, they're essential to progress. Because the opposite of that is really stagnation. And when we're stagnant by definition, we ain't moving. And in most team environments, whether it's the chess team or the bowling team or the corporate America team, the football team, we are aligned around a common cause, and we have by definition, we are aligned on our finish line, on where we're trying to go. And I felt organizations and leaders throughout my entire career, and I've worked for 3 Fortune 10 firms, are really good at expressing who they are externally via their mission statement, their values. And they do, in most parts, especially really mature, bigger organizations, they do a wonderful job explaining the nuts and bolts of the role that you're in, how to execute on that role. But they don't do a very good job telling leaders and working with members of their team and educating them and kind of putting them on the same level playing field in terms of how we're accountable, to whom we're accountable, how we behave. In very few organizations, maybe none, are there black and white requirements on how we're going to behave with one another. So I think that's a big gap in the world. And and your observation, I said, is beautiful because they're guideposts. The principles, the 10 W's are guideposts that, if you're behaving in a way that's outside of any one of those principles, you are behaving in a way that's contrary to who we are. And we won't stand for that. Not just Kyle, the boss, we as your teammates, we won't stand for that. So it does create almost a cultural currency that has the same value for the newest intern all the way to the most senior person on the team. You're absolutely right.
Well, I think one of the things that I really love about this idea of having 10 kind of guiding principles is you've given everybody a functional framework for how do we behave, what are the cultural norms. And let's take when you take an example like as you were explaining that we challenge each other, it reminded me of Elon Musk, how he's very much like, yeah, challenge me, but kind of you better be right type deal. Yeah. Otherwise you might not have it. So it did not number 9 in there, right? He, and then also it lacked the, diplomatically. So you really put together something that's a far more elegant solution. So we hear about pieces of this in a lot of different leadership stories and a lot of great leaders. You'll hear their, pieces and parts of this throughout. And I think the problem when you get to a company or a corporation and internally how this plays out with people is, well, how do you say that it's wrong? Like somebody gets to be a complete a-hole. Is that wrong? If they're right, then it goes right. And so there is no framework, and it's not against the law. It's a free country. I can say whatever I want. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. But now once you've got these guiding principles, now people can act. They know how to act, and they're goods. Would that be about right?
It's 100% right, Matthew. It's 100% right. As I kind of touched on a moment ago, there's a lot of not many companies invest in this type of stuff, right? They'll have a speaker come in, or they'll build out some DEI program, but they're not explicit on the rules of engagement, how we behave, how we treat one another. For example, one of the we's is we say what we're going to do and then we do it. I was purposeful to include something like that because you never want to fail to hit your commitments to a client, right? If you promise you're going to do something, you got to do it. But where have you heard that inside of the corporate world, where we're going to hold each other accountable to this? When you make a commitment to me, Matthew, whether we're peers, I work for you, you work for me on an org chart, doesn't matter. When you commit to deliver something for me, the only excuse ever that is okay on this team for that not to be delivered is if you're ahead of it. You don't wait till the day of, you don't wait till the day after, and then you make excuses. When you promise me something, likewise, when I promise you something, it's on me. And if we don't deliver, we have the right or the obligation to grab one another by the ear and say, dude, you promised me this. Because if we keep our commitments to each other, aren't we so much better positioned to keep our commitments to those we serve externally? And then we're unbeatable. That's you're absolutely right. Spot on.
Well, I want to go back. When you first started, you talked about how you were in that when you first came up with the 10 W's. And then as you transitioned to the next company, you kind of touched on it, but I'd like to know, kind of dive into the difference. The first one, huge success. They gobbled it up. They embodied it. They owned it and they use it. And it's huge success story. Second company, different environment, different people, different everything. How did that play out as you came in and tried to to bring the 10 W's in there?
Yeah, I did see it'd be dishonest to say that there wasn't some traction in that second organization. It did not get the adoption that I had seen not only in my previous role but all over the country since then, since I've written the book. But man, there was I'll share a quick story. There was a sentinel moment. I joined this organization, which we'll keep nameless. And about 3 months in, there was an annual leadership summit. It's where like the top air quotes 3,000 or so leaders from the entire organization we descended into Vegas, and we had like a 3-day, how those things go, right? Mm-hmm. I was asked to deliver a bit of a not a keynote, but I was asked to deliver some words to kind of rally the troops. And I'll never forget this, man. I was on stage and I kind of started to ad lib, and I had picked up in the first 90 days or so that there was not an overt focus on customer and client satisfaction. It was more about, our DNA and our history is so deep that we're able to just kind of do what we want to do without repercussions, because we were an enormous company, Fortune 7, I think at the time, maybe Fortune 8. But I sensed a lack of commitment to really wowing those we serve. So I'm on stage and I start to kind of ad lib a little bit. I said, by the way, show of hands, raise your hand if you think we are overtly and conspicuously committed to the customer experience. And remember, maybe 3,000 people in the room. 3 raised their hand. And those 3 reported to me. Parenthetically, there was another 2 or 3, maybe 4 that also reported to me that did not raise their hand. So I came off stage and man, was I bummed, not because my attempt to get everybody excited and throw their hands up, because who wouldn't throw their hands up by the way, the president of the division to whom I reported was on stage right next to me. So if nothing else, you guys could have lied. Like, throw your hand up. Yes, right. And I knew then that this place was the toxicity was deeply ingrained. And then I just started to see levels of duplicity that I had never seen before. I started to see positioning. But, I'm one of these guys, man, I'm so stubborn that when I left that organization, because I knew it wasn't a fit, I knew there was not a long-term solution there. I used that as fuel to write the book, even though I didn't have a rousing success there, and those principles did not see the adoption I was hoping. It was proof that the principles are needed for me and needed for the rest of the world. So that's when I just used it as fuel to create the book and where we are now.
I love it, and I think the great part about that is it adds. Thank you for sharing that story, because I think it adds so much realism to, because there is nothing that has this 100% adoption and success rate. It's kind of like why the 5-star anything doesn't sell as much as the 4.5-star thing, because come on, nothing's perfect. We know that. Right. Even though we want our things to be perfect, we know that you cannot please 100% of the people 100% of the time. Ain't gonna happen, right? Nope. Cool. So I think that's really great, and that there are corporate cultures that are just so stuck and they're not open to it. Fine, it was not the right time, the right place, the right delivery, whatever. Right. It has nothing to do with the fact, with the actual value of the 10 W's. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that's fantastic. And the more I go through this, the more I'm like, as I was reading the book, I can't think of an organization where this doesn't apply really well. So as you go to do things, just dropping it in, and it's great for a small organization because it's such an easy to adopt framework. Yeah. It's not something where you've got 28 things and it's what are some of these systems? Oh, yeah, I know you know them. Where it's these massive things. You got to go to training, and what are they? Crap.
Yeah. There's hundreds of them, right? There's these programs you must. Yeah, I'm with you.
And you got to become you go to the long, extensive trainings to try to adopt this and do these things, and it's crazy. Like where I love these guiding principles. So after you wrote, you've stepped away from corporate America. You wrote your book, but you've also got your coaching and speaking company, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? Kind of what the spark was that started it?
Yeah, I'd love to. So as I'm writing the book, which was kind of a cathartic process, because I was able to lean back and bring old stories and old terrible bosses and some really great ones back to the forefront of my memory and document those stories for the book. And I realized that as the book was coming to an end, that I was at a crossroad, that I needed to either go back into the fray of corporate America and was I really, as one of my good buddies would say, are you really about it? Are you really about it? Are you really about everything that you just wrote about? You took a year and a half or 14 months, whatever it was, to write this book. Going back to one company's great, but that's small potatoes, man. You've got a world out there that you say, but are you really about making sure that these principles get out there? So that crossroad is when I decided that my calling and my purpose was more than just one logo to the next inside the corporate world. So I knew I needed to create a vehicle to continue to evangelize these messages. I actually really enjoy the speaking component. I love connecting with audiences, especially when it's about a topic that I hold so much passion. So I do 2-3 speaking gigs a month, depending on the time of year. And in between that work, I get to meet lots of really smart people in my executive coaching practice, where obviously I'm really hell-bent on continuing to help and share the value of the principles and the whys. And I'm really happy to say a lot of my clients have taken those principles. They've put their own logo on them and they put it out there for their teams, and they're seeing great results. So, man, I just feel like at this point of my life and at this point in my career, I've been very lucky, and I think it's important that I share the things that made me by most measures somewhat successful. I think it's important to share those things. And now I'm less focused on me and my own growth, my own development, and much more focused on helping others, which, by the way, I have found the last several years to be so much more fulfilling than the first 24, because the number of people I've been able to really see a transformation and change in their lives is, dude, I could tell you name after name after name, but I'd struggle to tell one implementation or KPI that I'm really proud of throughout the previous almost 3 decades. So that's where I get my juice now.
That's great. And I feel the same way, because I think for me, that's always kind of been the focus for my business. I think it's really easy for people to say it's not personal, it's nothing personal, it's business. And I think that's just a cop out to be mean or rude, whatever it might be. Because I don't think there's anything more personal than business, because it's how you take care of yourself. You spend a third of your life there, maybe more. It's how you provide for your family. So I think it's very personal. And I think that becomes for me, the focus is always, how do we create a good environment that people love showing up? They love what they're doing. And, we pass that on to our clients. How do we then, share that? And it's been great, right? So I went from that Army mission to now we have this mission with my company to defend these, our clients and help them. And so it's always been kind of about helping my employees, helping our clients. And so it's so much more rewarding than, hey, looking at the numbers. Well, our growth is up, 10%. I want it to be up 25%. Who gives a crap, right?
Yeah.
That's great. You got to grow, but in any event, totally agree. So let me ask you, back on your business, your target audience, right? Who's your kind of ideal client for speaking or the coaching?
So it's a great question, because I've learned over the last year that there are 2 camps that reach out to me for a speaking opportunity. The first is they recognize that, at least they're smart enough, and they recognize that they've got an issue, whether it's a cultural toxicity type thing, or the team just needs a shot in the arm. Whatever the scenario is, they recognize that there's an opportunity to do something differently or better, and they want to check a box. In other words, they'll bring a guy in, he'll talk about his book, and people will get excited and rah, but nobody changes anything the next day. And those companies and those teams are worse off forever having me there, because there's a next level of excitement, and people think, wow, maybe we are going to be a little different. We are going to change. But then the leaders that brought me in behave no differently. That's one camp. The other side of the coin is the group that I love to work with. And it is the team that recognizes there is a way to be better. There is excellence that is untapped, and they're not sure how to get there. They've got a lot of good people that care a whole heck of a lot. But in many organizations, I've seen it so many times, I'm sure you have throughout your career, is, someone will get promoted to a role of leadership just because they were really good at their last job. That doesn't make them a leader. That doesn't arm them to lead. And these organizations are a combination of those, also really mature organizations that recognize maybe they're a bit stagnant. They've got an opportunity to lead and behave and treat each other a little differently. And almost every one of my executive coaching clients have come from a speaking engagement where I've left the stage and someone's walked up and said, hey, man, I could use some help. Or, hey, man, someone on my team could use some help. Are you open? Because the message has resonated. And so that's the kind of B2B component. The B2C, which has been really exciting, is people that have reached out that after reading the book, whether it be a DM or an email, or they hit my website, and then they say, man, I just got to get more. I need more than the book could give me. Can we set up some type of coaching arrangement? So It's all over the place, but and I want to help, and I want to make sure that the people that I'm working with are really invested, because listen, man, this stuff's not easy. Being a great leader, as you know, is not easy. So don't just read a book and feel like that's going to be the be all end all and you're going to wake up a better leader. You're not. It requires commitment every single day. So if you're not up for that challenge, then I would rather not work with you.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So do you focus, are these larger organizations? Is kind of, where's your favorite kind of sweet spot, if you will? I should say favorite or sweet spot.
Great.
Are we talking kind of the Fortune 500, Fortune 100, or mid cap, small cap, kind of startups? What,
And
where do you like?
all over. So I gave a talk earlier in the year to about I want to say there were 30 people in the room for an architecture firm that is, by most definitions, I would say is small. I gave a talk to a group of 5 at a marketing company not long ago. I've given a talk to over 1,000. I'm giving a talk early next year at a convention, not a convention, but a customer experience summit. Be a couple 150 people there. So it's really all over. I the only thing I look for in as naive as this may sound and as cliche or kind of BS as it may sound, I'm not doing it for money. I'm doing it for the leader or the organization that needs it, regardless of their size. Sure, I want to make money. I like money. But I have yet to let a speech go unattended because of money. We find a way to make it work, but it's all over the place, man. It's industry agnostic. I mentioned I gave a talk at Audi. Actually, one of my favorite engagements, and this was unique, is working with a school district in California. So a small school district who'd had a lot of turnover at the superintendent level. They had some real cultural challenges. Had one of the leaders of that organization read the book, reached out. So I gave an in-person talk. It was in California for that was a few months ago, and now I joined them on some monthly calls as kind of refreshers as they go throughout their year. So it's all over the place. And that group, by the way, just talk about energizes me, because these are people that are shaping the minds of the future of our country. Which there's no greater responsibility. It's not that the corporate gigs aren't full of responsibility and important as well, but I just take special care of those guys because I feel like that's where our future is, and it matters a lot to treat them well.
I love that, because I think that is one of those situations I've seen where it can get really toxic and bad, very quickly. It's a strange, I don't know, powder keg of toxicity.
Weird.
It's so weird, right? And I guess because it's maybe so hard to get to those levels, there's so much politics involved in, and we're talking like low level local politics where you've got
Exactly
to.
right.
It's so, and so it creates these not ideal uh, kind of situations where
Yeah.
people can't really lead because they have already committed to so many crummy diplomatic things, and
Nailed
now
it.
they're in office and they can't do it. And so
Yeah.
giving these principles, giving them a framework where it's like, hey, look, this is how we run the organization.
Yes.
This makes sense.
Yes.
Great. You can clean that up. When you've got an organization that actually wants to do that, I think I'm right
Home
there
run.
with you. I think good for you. Yeah, home run.
Thank
Totally.
you.
More schools could use that. More school
So
districts.
rewarding, man. Yeah. Dude,
Good
I
for
gave
you.
a talk at an 8th grade, a group of 100 8th graders a couple of weeks ago.
Nice.
Uh, it's so fun. It was just incredibly fun. And they, obviously they're early in their journeys and they hadn't had, a lot of exposure to the corporate world, clearly, other than what, they see from their parents. But they asked great questions. And I really focused on with that group, which is a bit of a different take, but I still feel this way regardless of the audience, is I told them their challenge throughout the rest of their journey is to try to find that sweet spot of this 3-circle Venn diagram with a role and a journey that provides them happiness, it makes them money, and it provides an impact. It delivers an impact. So I told them, if you can hit all 3 of those, you want to make money, because I'm not here to villainize money. We need it. We got bills. But I think we over-index on that, and the more we focus on happiness and impact, I think the money comes. So that was kind of a fun talk as well.
That's great. Well, I think that the thing I really love about the 10 We's are they these are ideas and principles that young children should have. They should have.
Right.
Number one, we do the right thing always. Like that's
Yeah.
a big one,
Yeah.
especially I think since there's so many influences in kind of pop culture to not do the right thing. The ends
Mhm.
kind of justify the means. And
Mhm.
there, as we discussed earlier, there's no room for debate. Things are black and white. And so I think these are great ideas to get into kids' heads where they're like, yeah, these are core principles to, for which to live a life.
Yeah, no doubt. Hey, man, I worked with a guy many years ago who was on the original team where these principles were rolled out, and he also felt like there was some applicability to how he raises his children. Actually, he only had one son at the time, and he told me a story I will never forget. They would eat their morning cereal out of a 10 Wee's coffee mug. They each would sit there and eat their cereal, right? And one morning, his son dropped the mug, milk and cereal flies everywhere. He turns to his dad and said, he didn't say the we number, but he said, "It's okay, Dad. We own our mistakes, right?" And we number 5 is we own our mistakes. To me, this kid just he's waiting for dad to like, oh my gosh, like this horrible, and we spilled milk, there's cereal everywhere. He said, "It's okay, Dad. We own our mistakes. I blew it. I'll clean it up." And they moved on. It's a
That's
beautiful moment.
awesome.
I'll never forget that.
That's fantastic. I realized that as we've taken all this time to talk about a couple of them, but we haven't given any of the listeners or viewers the kind of overview of the 10. Okay, you kind of run everybody through the 10.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So we've touched on we number 1. That's we do the right thing always. And I think the number one way, the primary way to make sure we're doing the right thing is we number 2. We lead by example. That gets kind of cliched and tossed around, but this just in, every single one of us, we are already leading by example. The question is that example worth replicating? Are you proud of it? It was in the newsletter, on the internet. Like, would you be okay with that behavior being published? And leading by example, I think the primary way to prove that you're leading by example is making good on your commitments. So we number 3 is we say what we're going to do, and then we do it. But when we say we're going to do something, it's not just talk, right? So we number 4 follows right behind, and that is we take action. So many times, especially in really big organizations and also in small, we see trouble. We see where a process is broken. We see something that needs to be addressed, but not my job. Doesn't fall in my circle. And if I do take that on, I'm probably going to be asked to fix it and get more work and not a lot of reward for that. So why would I even raise my hand? But in a culture of excellence, we take action. But if we're going to take action, we have to be aware that we're not going to be perfect all the time. So number 5 is we own our mistakes, right? So if you want your team to raise their hand to say, "Hey, boss," or "Kyle, we got a chance to be better over here," it's a little ugly, man. But if you're down, I'm going to go take a look at this, and they'll go take a look at that. But you have to be open to mistakes. When someone makes a mistake, I really could care less unless it's made out of malice or just complete carelessness. But if someone makes a mistake, it's a mistake. It's not the end of the world. It's not fatal. They can be, but by and large, I think we overemphasize the negativity associated with mistakes. But if we're going to own our mistakes, we have to be prepared to take on we number 6, and that is we pick each other up. So I think everyone's obligation, especially the leaders, is to reach their hand down when a member of the team is struggling, whether it's something going on at home, maybe their performance is sliding at the job, whatever the scenario is, right? Maybe they're going through a divorce, right? Those are all human affecting and impacting things. They're not going to be exactly the same. We have to pick each other up. The leader's obligation goes a step further with this one, and that is we must propel members of the team to new heights. Not just enough to pick them up. If they want to do more, even including take your job, even including taking on a role at a different organization, I think it's the leader's responsibility to help them achieve that. Because by the way, when the team member senses that you're really in it for their growth and not just because they're a cog in the machine, they sense that you're really invested in them. They will deliver more. They will work harder. So I think it's important to push people and help them get to their next landing spot. So now we've gone through the first 6, and the next 4 are a little tougher for some to grasp, and it's a little less rainbows and unicorns. And this is where it gets a little inflammatory or controversial, I should say, at some time. We number 7 is we measure ourselves by outcomes, not activity. I think a lot of times in the corporate world, especially in bigger companies, again, we're meeting to death. We have hour-long meetings when we should have a 15-minute meeting. You know, a lot of executives wear their calendar with 13 meetings on it like a badge of honor. I don't. I would tell my teams, I don't care. I don't care how many hours you work. I don't care from where you're working, because we have a finite list of expectations that we've established between the two of us. And if you deliver on those, I'm good. So I don't care about how busy you are. I don't care. I don't care that you scheduled a meeting to get to a meeting. It doesn't matter to me. We're focused on the outcomes. We number 8, as we've touched on a bunch, as we challenge each other, and we 9, as we embrace challenge. I think 2 of the most, if not maybe the most important of the 10. And once you make it to 10, we are at the doorstep of our culture of excellence. And we number 10 is we obsess over details. In most industries, the difference between the really big and the not so big, or the excellent and not so excellent, or the great or not so great, is the obsession over details. I happen to believe the level of obsession that we use and focus on towards the details are indicative of the level of obsession that we have for serving our clients, serving those that pay our bills, ultimately our salaries. So we're going to focus on the details. The details are not just some benign thing. The details are what make us us, and that's what's important. And man, that's a tough one for people to grasp too. And I'm talking about real detail oriented, like the same font size on every page of a presentation. I'm talking about exact, everything is tight in everything that we do. Not perfect, as you mentioned earlier. That's silly. We're not aspiring for perfect. We're aspiring for excellence. And the only way to get to excellence is really focus on details. That's the 10 W's, man.
I love that. And I think you make such a great point there, because so many people use perfection as, in the wrong way. It stops them, it hurts them, and then they avoid it altogether. And they don't even go after the details, and they're like, broad strokes. Great. You're slapping paint on it, but you've not created something that anybody wants to look at, because it's just broad strokes. Right.
Yeah.
I think one thing that I wanted to go back on was number 5. We own our mistakes. I think, interestingly enough, I don't think kind of our generation had necessarily this same problem, but I'm seeing the younger generations, the way they work incredibly hard at school. They're very accomplished, right? They take more AP classes. They get great grades. They do all of the extracurricular activities they're doing. And they're I think the problem is they have been in this environment where you are given information, you're tested on the information, you get a perfect score or not. And so they work towards getting perfection and not having mistakes. And there's no, in their schooling for 12 years, and then even in college, there is no, hey, look, these are learning opportunities. When you F up, that's now you've got an opportunity to learn from that. That's not oh, you're less than perfect, you screwed up. Which, why would they think that when they've spent 12 to 16 plus years in an environment of, I get this, I take a test on it. Well, that's not the real world, right? So then they get out into the real world, and it's like there's no finite curriculum that they can be tested on. And then for them to somehow be in a position where they embrace mistakes, how do they even try something when there's no, they've spent their whole lives in this bubble, right? So I love number 5 for that reason. I think that's such an important one, especially for the younger crowd.
Yeah, well said, man. Well said. And I would just add to that, if we're not owning mistakes, we're hiding them. And if we're hiding them, how do we ever get better? How do we ever get better? I want my teams to be tough on problems, tough on challenges, but not tough on the people that made the mistake or the person that stumbled, right? Let's fix the problem. Care less about who made the mistake, care less about credit. And the only way to get better is to recognize that we're not good at something. And that usually involves recognizing a mistake somewhere along the path.
I love that. That is so well said. I mean, that is brilliant. And all of these things, there's so much. And, I read a lot about leadership and management and self-help. And you've done such a great job compacting so much stuff into something that is, you can wrap your hand around, you can wrap your mind around, you can actually take action on it and incorporate it. So kudos there. I love this whole concept. It's no wonder it's on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. It's well deserved.
Thanks, man.
Before we wrap up here, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you, where they can get your book, and yeah.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for that. So the book is available wherever books are sold. You just Google "Begin with We." A lot of folks obviously go to Amazon because it's quick, but it's at Barnes and Noble, it's Target, pretty much everywhere. I'm actually a fan of the Audible version. I narrated the book. And it sounds a little arrogant to say, but I do believe the book comes to life in all books when it's the author reading his or her own words. So it was important for me to do that myself. And then social media is all handles are at Kyle McDowell Inc. I love interacting with followers, answering questions. Man, real quick story though. This past weekend on a Sunday, I got an email from my website, which I should add is kylemcdowellinc.com. I got an email through my website where someone was vulnerable enough. Her name is Dixie. She reached out to say that her team had overcome so many challenges this year. I can't make this up. She overcome so many challenges this year. Her team internally was known as the black hole, because people went there and never resurfaced, or problems would go there and never come out alive. And there's a fella to whom she reports. His name is Jim, and Jim is the reason that the team has performed the way that they have. But she said she sensed that his leadership tank was running on empty, and she asked would I put a letter together, and she literally asked for a letter that she could frame in his office because she felt like the impact that he had this year was because of reading the book. Which I have chills telling that story. It just happened a few days ago. So I signed a book and put some attaboys in there and sent it off to him. But that's the kind of interaction I just crave, in the satisfaction and fulfillment that comes from that is something I've never experienced. So it's really cool. But the answer to the question is Kyle McDowell Inc.
Well, I love that. And I think that's just the tip of the iceberg, Kyle. What you've done here is fantastic. I think it's going to go on for to make a lot of people's lives much better, a lot of people's work lives much better. So kudos on a job well done. And I look forward to your continued success.
Yeah, and likewise. Hey, man, you're doing really important work here. I love your podcast. Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Pleasure's all ours. Thanks, buddy.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.